Thank you. Hey everyone, we're the ultimate session here. So thank you all for coming and staying to the close to the end of the event. So yes, I'm Neil Trevett, and my day job is actually at NVIDIA. NVIDIA lets me spend time on standardization. I'm the president of the Kronos Group and president of the Metaverse Standards Forum. Several of us here, we wear multiple hats, but the Metaverse Standards Forum is kind of the host for this panel. And we're going to be talking about 3D asset interoperability using USD glTF. Interoperability of 3D assets now is a vitally important subject for anyone who's creating and deploying immersive content. And it's simple. Now, everyone just wants to import and create assets in the tooling pipeline of their choice, to deploy those assets easily and efficiently on a wide diversity of platforms with great performance and visual accuracy and consistency. So that sounds easy. But the fact that you're in this room right now probably is a good indicator that you know that it's not trivial. The lack of pervasive and capable standards in the past have traditionally made 3D authoring and delivery a fragmented and often frustrating experience. But good news. So over the last few years, there are two 3D interoperability standards that have gathered a lot of attention and industry momentum, and that's USD and glTF. These are two independent standards being hosted by two different standards organizations. They started with very different missions. One was to create a large collaborative team of designers at Pixar to make awesome movies, and the other had the goal of enabling pervasive delivery of 3D content to any device, including the web running on my mum's old Android phone. So I'll let you guess which is which. So glTF is developed by the Kronos Group. It's a 3D asset format, the current version, glTF 2.0, shipped in 2017. It's gathered a set of extensions for advanced PBR, mesh, and texture compression. It's widely adopted. It's been accepted as an ISO international standard. It's just been added to PDF as a 3D add-in to the PDF format. And over the next few quarters, it's going to be shipping a significant new functionality. The Alliance for Open USD, or AOUSD, was launched last year with the support of many leading industry players. Its mission is to take the open source project that was pioneered by Pixar and create an open standard specification that will enable the power of USD to be widely used across many industries, not just making movies. So both USD and glTF are both awesome in their own ways, but although they started with different missions, the two are on a potential collision course. USD will become increasingly efficient for real-time applications, and glTF is going to add more functionality for increasingly sophisticated deployment use cases. So, the cliffhanger, is the industry about to be plunged into another formats war? Or is there a more collaborative approach where we can work together to avoid industry pain and confusion? This is where the Metaverse Standards Forum, I actually have a slide. I should have been saying, let me put up the right slide here, just a moment. All this. All right. All that work that went into that slide. I'm glad I remembered to display it. So this is where the Metaverse Standards Forum is playing a role, and why the forum is hosting the panel here today. So the Metaverse Standards Forum, it's not another standards organization. It's a neutral venue for standards organizations to come together to cooperate between each other and with the wider industry. That includes Kronos, AOUSD, and other awesome organizations like ASWF, who has multiple open source projects such as MaterialX and Open PBR that we'll probably talk about here today that are relevant to both glTF and USD. The forum has around 15 different working groups working on encouraging interoperability in different domains, including this working group that we'll be talking about here today, that has brought together Kronos and AOUSD and the glTF and USD communities to figure out how we can best work together to leverage each other's strengths. So glTF and USD can both accelerate their own missions, and at the forum, we are discussing the potential to align the roadmaps of USD and glTF to avoid duplication and fragmentation, and how we can provide clarity to the industry on how these standards work best together to the benefit of all. So that's the preamble. Sounds like a good idea, but is it working? And that's what we're here to find out. So we're very fortunate to have three awesome speakers that are deeply involved in using and encouraging use of 3D across the industry. So thank you all for your ongoing efforts, and thank you for being here today. I'd like to ask each of you to introduce yourselves. Who are you, and how did you get here? So, Ashley?
Yeah, it's nice to be here. I'm Ashley Crowder, the co-founder and CEO of Ventana. We're a 3D asset management platform that makes it easy to manage and distribute 3D models everywhere. So we're constantly dealing with a million different 3D file formats and specifications, and really happy that we got involved with Kronos Group a while ago to really help with the standards of glTF, because so many of our consumer and brand clients are focused on getting 3D on the web. Though we are, working with a lot of industrial manufacturers as well, which, has actually been leading us some into USD, who are starting to use Omniverse to run simulation models for various digital twins. So yeah, excited to get into it, and why we probably need both, so.
Yep. Henrik?
Yeah, I'm Henrik. I'm a software architect at Autodesk. I work in what we call the graphics platform group. So we work on a lot of shared graphics technology and components that gets used all across our different products, from Revit, AutoCAD, Inventor, Fusion, to 3ds Max and Maya, and many others. So my background is mostly in rendering for the last 20 plus years, real-time rendering, physically based rendering, also some high-end offline rendering, light transport simulation, and so on. But in the last 7 years or so, I've been looking more and more into interoperability and how we can represent everything 3D graphics related, from scenes to geometry, materials, lights, cameras, and so on, in a more standardized way, so we can improve the workflows between our own products within Autodesk, but also towards all the third-party products that our customers are using. So Autodesk is a big supporter of open standards and open source, and we are obviously a member of all the organizations that Neil mentioned earlier, founding member of the Metaverse Standards Forum, AOUSD, Academy Software Foundation, and also a long-time member of Kronos. So we are very actively contributing to many of these standards like USD, glTF, MaterialX, OpenPBR, OpenColor.io, OpenImage.io, OSL, and many others. So I'm very excited to be here to talk about these standards and how we can improve interoperability for the whole ecosystem.
Great, thank you. Aaron?
Hi, I'm Aaron Luke. I'm lead product manager on NVIDIA Omniverse for the USD ecosystem, so growing USD adoption around different industries. Before that, I was a software developer for many years. In particular, I was the first USD developer on NVIDIA Omniverse, and before that, I was at Pixar for 8 years, where I was one of the original developers of USD there. So I've similarly worn lots of hats, lots of, kind of been a graphics generalist in VFX animation, and now accelerated computing. I'm also serving as the chair of the core specification working group in the AOUSD. So the mission of that group is to define, like Neil said, ISO standard for the lowest foundational levels of USD. How the data models are defined and how they get composed and how they populate the scene graph. And all of that is actually mostly 3D agnostic, which is really useful for digital twins, in which a lot of the data that encompasses the scene is not visual and it's not even 3D. It might be product information, might be IoT sensor data, all these things that can feed the entire aggregate of your worldview.
very cool. So that we have the right people here. And we want to make this an interactive session as far as we're able to. So we're going to open it up to questions to the floor around halfway through. So get your trickiest questions ready, and we'll be happy to answer them. But let's start with kind of the highest level question. So historically, there's literally, if you look on Wikipedia, there are hundreds of 3D standards and formats. Over the years, we seem to be coalescing around USD and glTF. But is coalescing down to 2 enough? Why not 1? So is there a value in having at least 2 formats, or should we be striving over time to unify into 1? What do you think the ecosystem needs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful to have at least 2. I mean, especially right now, you went through it in detail, but glTF is a really great publishing format at the end of the day. USD is really great for enormous scenes, and when you have multiple people working on the same scene, and it can really track that data well, and it's a great transfer format. We talked about they are starting to converge, but I think at the end of the day, having at least 2 different formats that can focus on different areas is important. And we were just talking about, images have been around forever, and we still have JPEG and PNG, So I think 2 is good. Let's not keep 100, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just seconding that, like if you look at other, aspects, you have multiple image formats, multiple audio formats. There's in engineering, it's very. You always have to make trade-offs. You have to focus on certain areas. You can't necessarily put everything into one basket and optimize for everything at the same time. So I think we're slowly finding a nice balance there between what do we need for maximum flexibility as you work through a project, and what do we need for very efficient delivery and portability. So there's, to me, it makes sense to have multiple formats, but finding the right balance of how many, that's an open question.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I think reducing the number of file formats is good for a number of reasons, but there are good reasons for multiple ones to exist. So I think the exercise is not so much reducing the number of file formats, but reducing the number of data models, right? And so you can have multiple file formats, but as much as possible, they should agree on what the data models are for meshes, and we'll talk about materials in a bit, especially because there are so many existing content ecosystems and data ecosystems, right? And it's not, as good citizens, we honor the investment that has gone into those for the creators of those, and particularly all the stakeholders that have a lot of content in those formats, right? So interop doesn't have to be this disruptive thing where like we force all these other content to like convert to other file formats. That is like the authoritarian way to get to interoperability, but I don't think that is sort of the way in which everyone is going to buy in, especially if we're going to do things like digital twins that require lots and lots of different data to come together.
Yeah, so to drill down one level of detail on that then, so where do you see the biggest dangers of fragmentation, or the biggest opportunities to have one data model? I mean, where do you see we should be trying to converge?
So I think we've already converged very well on geometry, right? Now for meshes, I think everyone agrees there's points in topology. You can maybe debate what buffers you want to put them in or at runtime or whatever, but we all agree that's what a mesh is, right? And we could take that, and now we're expanding it to materials as well. Materials is a little bit less scoped because you have materials and you have material graphs. Right, so I think Material X has done a really nice job of abstracting, the material graphs can be made up of nodes, and this is how you can connect those nodes together, right? And it's actually compatible with USD Shade as well. USD Shade graphs and Material X graphs can more or less map to each other very, very nicely. And then the next step now in the AOUSD materials working group is, let's define some standard nodes inside of Material X, all right? That we know that these are the inputs to those nodes, and these are behaviors for those nodes. I think Open PBR is a great effort here as well. So materials, I think, is the next place where we're converging in common data models.
Yeah, that's probably the most important area to tackle next, is to get visual consistency as you move between different formats for different workflows or use cases. And if the materials are not translated properly, you will lose a lot of that consistency. But it is a challenging problem to tackle everything from like the highest end offline rendering to real time in AR and so on. And how do you define something that is capable to express everything and still look consistent from like high end still image generation to real time applications?
Can you give the 30-second summary of how OpenPBR, MaterialX, and the glTF PBR model kind of relate?
Yes.
I'll give you 45 seconds.
Okay. I need 45. Yeah, so MaterialX is this general concept to describe everything related to materials. So not just the material model itself, but also all the inputs, which could be textures or procedural inputs. But within MaterialX, you can express different shading models, of which OpenPBR is one such model that we're trying to get industry alignment on as kind of the go-to PBR model, physically based rendering model. glTF also has its own PBR model that developed somewhat independently, but we were trying to make sure that those are consistent. So OpenPBR might capture a little bit more than what the glTF PBR model does, but we want them to easily map back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, MaterialX is kind of the underlying transport mechanism for these shading models and associated textures and procedures.
Yes, cool. 55 seconds, pretty good.
Not so bad.
Yeah, I'm personally very excited about MaterialX because I know we were chatting, one of the issues our team has right now is with MDL materials, with USD, and trying to, how do we convert that into something for GLB and glTF. And so we're very excited about everything you just talked about to be able to map that. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually interested. So because you use glTF a lot for your customers, I mean, is the glTF PBR model holding up? Is it giving you what you need for you and your pipelines and your customers? Or
I mean, there's always feature requests,
Yeah.
right? There's always going to be feature requests, and we've talked a lot about, and it goes back to people creating content in non-real time and then converting to real time. So, we've got fashion designers using fur and displacement maps, and then being upset that it's not translating to glTF. So, I know we're working on improvements and extensions to be able to do that. But, it all depends on the category.
Right. So one of the projects that is in discussion and hopefully about to start at the Metaverse Standards Forum Domain Group is we're calling it USD glTF round tripping, which is maybe though a bit of a misnomer. Aaron, do you want to, what is it?
So round tripping is more the exercise of what we're going through, right? That's not necessarily the goal, right? The goal is to sort of map out the capabilities of USD and glTF and prioritize which features are most highest priority to be able to translate between the two, and identifies the ones where it doesn't make sense to translate between the two. Certainly, I think materials here is going to be a big story as well. There's already discussion about OpenPBR and glTF PBR, and to follow on to Ashley's story about the MDL, right? That's also being a part of the OpenPBR effort as well. There's some cool Slack threads right now where you see like MDL implementations of OpenPBR on the OpenPBR assets and iterating through on that. So that's fun. That's fun to follow. But you take, imagine that Slack thread times 1,000,000 for the USD glTF round tripping exercise, right? And so there's a lot of good efforts there. There's a spreadsheet of kind of like the features that are on the roadmap. There are a lot of good mechanisms there already for moving data back and forth between USD and glTF. There's the Adobe file format plugin, right? There's Pablo Delgado's Gook, right? Omniverse has a file format plugin for glTF as well that we're harmonizing with the Adobe one. So yeah, there's a lot of good effort that's now converging, just like the technologies are on this round tripping exercise.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a productive project, because even if we can't solve all the questions, it forces the right conversations to be happening. But Henrik, from your tools vendor. I mean, how do you see, do you see people mainly importing in glTF into USD-based tools? Or, I mean, how do you see your tools strategy working out with the round-tripping background context?
Yeah, so I mean, there are certainly workflows going both ways. So it's not that you necessarily in practice round trip back and forth, but let's say you have a bigger project where you want to work in USD because of the flexibility and all the features you have to facilitate collaboration and the layering and non-destructive overrides and so on. So in that context, you might want to bring in glTF models because there's a lot of asset libraries and published final asset available in glTF. So you might want to bring them into USD format so you can do further editing and kind of make them part of this big project. So that's one way. So what features of glTF does it make sense to kind of carry as you go into USD? And then on the other end, when you're getting to a stage where you want to publish either your complete project or parts of it in a very distributable form, you might want to export that to glTF. And then the question is, okay, what aspects of USD do you want to carry forward? So obviously the things related to visual fidelity and consistency, you probably want to have both ways, but all the flexibility that USD has doesn't make sense to carry as you go to glTF with the layers and so on. So there's an open question on identifying which workflows you want to have in the import stage and then the export stage.
Yeah, and a shout out to Adobe, if you haven't checked it out already, they have an open source project underway for bringing multiple file formats, not just glTF, into USD. Are you using glTF to USD import yet? Or have you looked at the Adobe stuff? Or is that part of your pipelining?
Within Ventana?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our team is constantly looking at all of the latest developments and, adding slowly because we don't want to add things until they're ratified and agreed upon because otherwise we'll be building things that we have to change. But yeah, I mean, today we accept we accept GLB, USD, except for the MDL materials. And then we're automatically giving you an optimized GLB and USDZ at the end to be able to at least publish anywhere. Because most of our clients are worried about how do I publish and share these assets, particularly with non-technical people, because the sales and marketing team needs them. They want to be able to train people. There's a lot of use cases where you to your point, you don't need all those layers. You don't want everyone to have the ability to edit. You just want them to view and interact. So.
Yeah, I remember the first scene caching system I implemented at Trevett Studio, and the animator was like, yes, you're preserving my artistic intent by not letting people change my animation in this cache. So,
Yeah, so talking about anime, I mean, one of the nice things about the domain group, all of the domain groups in the forum, it's an opportunity to bring in industry experts. And actually, Felix, who's sitting here, we had an awesome presentation from Felix on exactly this subject last week, and it scared us to death with all the issues, but animations, we're never going to get that to work. No, we'll get it to work eventually. So another project that the domain group is thinking about is, I don't know we don't have an official name for it, but is it the FBX elimination project?
I don't know what we call it, but
just FBX gap analysis.
Migration or
I mean,
something
like
that.
gap analysis is accurate, right?
Yeah.
It's not about. I mean, it's informing like kind of the kind of study that Felix did in terms of what are the gaps in animation between the different formats right now, and there are still some things in FBX that aren't there in USD or glTF. Right, so yeah, I think in that spirit, it's like it's super important information now because FBX is part of that content ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously very widespread support for FBX in many different tools, and I think that's yes, there are some gaps too, feature gaps that USD and glTF doesn't necessarily capture everything that FBX can do, but I think the main adoption blocker, or for moving from an FBX-based workflow to let's say USD is the tooling support. But yeah, we got to start somewhere to kind of identify those gaps, and just for the benefit of the whole ecosystem, we don't want to have too many file formats. And now when we have two open standards in USD and glTF, we from Autodesk perspective, being the owner of FBX, we don't see much value in continuing that effort. So if we can help the industry migrate to other open standards, that would be, we believe, would be in the benefit for the industry as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Autodesk is to be applauded because an FBX is obviously an Autodesk technology, but Autodesk has seen the wider picture, and there are still, as you were saying, still pipelines that need FBX because neither USD or glTF has quite filled that gap. And so if you can simplify everyone's tooling pipelines with the assistance and the encouragement of Autodesk, I think that's a good thing to do. So we're halfway through, so I'm going to fulfill my promise. Does anyone have any questions from the audience? Yes, thank you. We'll just wait for the mic so we can get it recorded. Thank you. Okay, can we turn on the house mic? Hello?
I can speak loud.
No, we need the mic. Can we turn on the house mic? Yeah, should be on.
1, 2, 3, testing, yeah?
Yeah, that's on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So fabulous, I'm so excited with all these technologies. So I was wondering the BIM CAD standards. I think it's, a year ago that all the architecture and engineering software is beginning to talk with the game engines, and I think that opens an immense amount of opportunities that we could never see before. So I was wondering, where do you see those standards that are just as complex, the geospatial tools? I'm very interested to learn more from you.
That's a great question. Yeah.
You want to start? Or?
Oh, geospatial in particular?
Yeah, the BIM standards, building information model.
Oh, building, yeah. Sure. Yeah, so I think that the key there, right, is that those are existing standards. And for things like USD and glTF, right, it's not good for USD and GL to reinvent the wheel. What we want to do is transport existing data in those standards through. So both USD and glTF have, and this is what I meant about common data models, right? So for example, I think IFC, right, is defined in like a JSON file or something like that. So that data model is a JSON file. I think at one point, one of our engineers at NVIDIA wrote like a prototype script to turn that JSON file into a USD schema.usda file, which then you can then generate code for USD to speak to those IFC models, right? For geospatial, we also did a prototype as well with the WGS84, where you could do georeferencing by applying a WGS84 schema to a transformable prim in USD, and then apply relative offsets to its children and things like that. And then you would be able to effectively pose your geometry using WGS84 coordinates there. Then as AOUSD forms more interest groups and working groups, right, we'll sort of like turn those into prototypes into something that's more widely adopted and reviewed.
From like a practical standpoint, we work with a lot of industrial manufacturing companies who work in a variety of different AutoCAD programs. And so from the business standpoint, like, do you always want to build out your pipeline so your organization can leverage that asset in every aspect? And so we always try and be Switzerland, and it's like, okay, save that original file and make sure that has access, but find a way to automatically create the derivatives you need for the different end use cases, but always have everything tied back in a way that you can search and find that original. So from a practical standpoint, we're seeing, forward-thinking organizations do that and set up their DAM systems to be able to store that original, automatically convert, and have that GLB for publishing on the web, have the USD for more intense simulation models. But just, I think it's so important that organizations think that through when they start building out their asset management platforms.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super interesting area, and I think AOUSD is starting an interest group to tackle those questions, and how can this potentially be applied to AEC and manufacturing, and how does USD relate to all these other standards? And I think the main, or one possibility we have, is to not have like the visual representation of a project just be a derivative. So you're like, if you publish to something, and now I can see it in my game engine, but you can have that as an integral part of the project. So at all times during the project, you can visualize it anytime, and it's not something that you kind of do on the side to kind of shorten that loop. So you can make design decisions in your game engine or in your AR, VR environment, and I can actually modify the real design data. But the challenging or the questions that needs to be addressed is like, how does all these standards come together and how do they interact with each other and so on. So we need to have the right forum for those conversations to take place, because they're all in different different standard bodies, and there's no like common intersection point. But we're trying to address that, and both through the Metaverse Standards Forum, obviously, but also AOUSD, kind of creating these groups where we can have those cross-functional discussions.
But definitely you see it as an important integration, right, of the standards. The BIM.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's a good question.
Amazing. We had a question over here, and then we'll have more.
So one thing that
Wait. Can you turn the mic back on? Can you try the other mic?
So one thing that both glTF and USD are very adamant on is that they only deal with data and data models. And that leads to the interesting challenge that we are seeing a lot, that like I can prove doing a perfect conversion, for example, from a glTF to a USD file or in the other direction, but what consumers see is still different depending on whatever application they open it. So like we have clients doing multi-layer lamp structures with like multi-layered glass and whatever, and they can't get it right. So it's really, really hard to get that consistent. But like the challenge there is that both the glTF and USD groups say that's not really our problem because the data is correct. And the renderers or the viewers, they say, well, nobody told us how this should work, so we're just going to do whatever. There's nothing to align on.
Right.
So, and I think it's good that there's a focus on the data model, but from a user of these formats perspective, it's really, really challenging that nobody is willing to kind of take the helm and say, like there is a way how we should make this consistent. So.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
yeah.
a good question.
Yeah.
So can we address that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Kronos is trying to address that in some way by having the, certified viewer, which is like a step in the right direction because, what extensions does your viewer support is important to know because.
That does not certify anything about the rendering of like how it looks.
But it affects how it looks on your desktop, or if you're publishing to one e-commerce site versus Amazon's, which is like Babylon versus 3JS, and Amazon doesn't support some of the glTF extensions that you might have included in your file. So from that standpoint, that's like one step forward that I think is really important and helpful. But the others come into like the Material X and Open PBR and everything that you guys are working on.
I mean, it's clear that that's a gap. It just seems pretty challenging. I know, like within Kronos, we've had like those certification discussions and efforts for at least 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And I think we're still not there. That you can easily have. Okay, this is a stamp of approval that it looks consistent with some sort of benchmark. But especially as things grow with new features and taking like USD and Material X and Open PBR and everything together, yes, it's a big challenge, but it's obviously something that would benefit the industry if we had better test suites and conformance, benchmarks and so on.
Yeah, I agree. And I wouldn't say that AOUSD or Kronos is saying that it's not our problem for sure. Like for the core specification, for sure, we're not just specifying the data models, but we are specifying the expected behaviors for the composition engine and stage population. There's also efforts, there's going to be a birds of a feather at SIGGRAPH for materials and rendering interop, where some folks are going to be talking about ways of addressing things in, for example, USD Lux that are underspecified in terms of lights in USD and things like that. So I think there are efforts here, and eventually they will go into standards as well. And certainly it's not the intent of the standards to just stop at the data model. There has to be an expected behavior as well, where what it will leave open is like how runtime implementations optimize for different use cases and things like that. But there definitely is known rules around governing how inputs are processed to produce an expected result.
Yeah, just like in practice, we're still seeing creators make weird files so that they look right in one particular software. And I see that as problematic. Like if, okay, yeah, there is a standard, but it doesn't describe the behavior enough to actually be sure. So, and then people, I don't know, reorder node hierarchies so that transparency renders in the right order and whatever. So,
Right.
and that is a problem for people expecting interoperability to work. And yeah, so that's more than just data model. It's also not just material model. It's more about, okay, some notion of what should happen. So
Yeah. I mean, do we think that there's maybe a place, particularly as USD is just coming online and glTF is bringing in new functionality, is there a place to kind of address the gap that Felix is talking about? Maybe some guidelines or white papers, not necessarily fully formalized, ratified specifications to help guide and get some consistency. Because I think most people in the industry want to be consistent and use the tools and the standards that they have in a way that's going to work, right? So, but very often, I think the probably rightly highlighting is that we don't give the guidance or people don't understand. So is there an opportunity to kind of interstitial
guidance?
I mean,
there's always, white papers are always sort of in the works, certainly around asset structuring, airchains, and along with you, Felix, I think you regularly publish your findings and things like that for the community to sort of process around. So yeah, I think those activities are ongoing, and eventually they will translate into standards as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work that remains, and you just mentioned UC Lux. So I think we're not quite there with materials yet, but we have barely started tackling lighting, especially in the completely physically based workflow. So yeah, there are several pieces missing, and then there are some aspects of materials that are challenging to standardize, like with transparency and refraction and things like that, where you can't expect all renderers to do the completely physically based thing necessarily. And how do we mandate certain trade-offs in approximation? It is challenging. I don't have the answer, but we should at least have a forum where we can discuss all those questions.
Cool, thank you for the question. And any other questions? Yeah. There's a question up close to the back there. Can you raise your hand? I'm glad we opened it up. These questions are way more interesting than the ones I had.
Hi. So a question about a lot of what was talked here really focuses on the workflow of the creators or the ones working with the models, and it's kind of very web-centric, or at least that kind of workflow-centric. How would you describe the level of effort that's going on to more widespread game engine adoption to the standards? Obviously, there's these various workflows of conversions, but these tend to suffer the type of errors that the gentleman was talking about earlier, and so that prevents, right? We've had many situations where you wind up reverting to the FBX, for example, because you just can't use importers reliably. And obviously, the engines announce all these, conversion to and from USD. And then a follow-up, which may not be perfectly on point, but kind of related. I think there's developing a little bit of a confusion as to kind of where Omniverse, or where kind of how far will the USD go towards scripting behavior, or the type of stuff that normally you would actually do in an engine beyond an animation. So would love to hear your perspectives on both of those.
Okay. Yeah, so for the first one, you're dealing with game engines that don't support all the USD features you need?
Well, no, let's say it's Unity or whatever. I'm just trying to understand what is, how much effort is the standards group pushing into getting the game engines take on full adoption.
I see, okay. I think, let me try to answer both questions with the same thing and see if that converges, right? So I'm not really sure if you're aware, but Pixar has this effort called Open Execution, right? And so in particular, USD is carved out from the lowest foundational levels of Pixar's entire software stack in the Presto animation system. And Presto itself has an execution system. It has a way of setting up node graphs for execution. This is how their characters are deformed and things like that, right? And so there's an effort to carve out parts of that to become part of USD under this open exec umbrella. Within AOUSD, I think what my idea there is to form an interest group about execution that covers that, not just open execution, but sort of mapping that to like other game engine behaviors and node graphs and things like Omniverse's action graph, things like that. And probably there's work to harmonize with the interactivity specification that glTF just published as well. So I think that, and then in the meantime, right, because Kronos and AOUSD have a liaison agreement, right, AOUSD representatives can go to the interactivity working group in Kronos and sort of start brainstorming ideas there. But ultimately, it's going to come down to the same, basically common data model of like, okay, can we agree upon like sort of the, like similar to Material X, the notion of node and inputs and connections and how those get evaluated and things like that. And then, leave it open to like, okay, the actual business logic of what those nodes do like is as flexible as what you could do in those game engines and things like that. But that's sort of the rough roadmap I see for that in USD, and also harmonizing it with technology that Omniverse has kind of done to have those behaviors on top of USD and Omniverse.
Yeah, thank you. Anything you want to add, Ashley or Henrik?
No, I'm not super familiar with like the extent of glTF and USD support in the various different engines, but I mean, it's certainly there. So I would
Unreal, I think, is better than Unity at supporting glTF right now. But so I think, getting those organizations more involved. They both are, I'm pretty sure, involved in Kronos and Open USD, but it's all a matter of bandwidth and time and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, speaking as another software vendor, just push your requirements on your the particular software you're using. I need this and that feature from USD or glTF. That's it's not something that is going to come from.
They won't listen to me, but I asked Michael Kors and Puma to go tell them to do it. I'm like, I'll draft an email, forward it.
Well, you definitely got my attention with the MDL thing, so
Yeah.
I'm look into that. I'm pretty sure there's something like in the works for that.
I see a bug report in your future.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. No, thank you. Felix, let's go again.
Similar question to what I asked in the glTF presentation, and to the point that you were just mentioning of like software saying they support glTF or they support USD. I know there have been like some attempts at adding like versioning to USD, for example, so that it's more clear. Like what I would love to see is some words from some of these forums on actually proposing that softwares document properly which versions they support, which subsets they support. Internally we developed this notion of a safe subset of glTF and a safe subset of USD that are actually practical to move around. And these are small. Like if you actually look at what people are doing with these files, then suddenly you have like maybe 70% of glTF that actually works everywhere and maybe 20% of USD that actually works everywhere.
Yes.
And what I would love to see is more efforts from the standardization groups on actually not forcing, but very strongly suggesting that companies document what they mean when they say USD support. Like Unity putting out USD packages and they do something entirely different than what you would expect. So that's challenging for people actually trying to leverage these new formats and creates a lot of frustration that then puts all the efforts back by years again. Because these companies trying the workflows now, because everyone's saying this is great, they're not going to try it for the next 5 years.
Right.
So because they run into so many challenges because of people not documenting what is actually expected to work.
Yeah, no, I agree. Actually, we were just talking about that before, but we were having our prep meeting. As we were talking yesterday too, the glTF group is particularly sensitized to this because the Kronos group also did Collada, and that was it got a lot of adoption in the day, but we fell into the problem kind of that you're talking about, too much functionality too soon without consistent and widely available implementations, and it was kind of scary how fast that ecosystem lost its momentum. So we are motivated not to make that same mistake again. Any suggestions on how we can avoid that terrible fate?
Yeah, I think, and Felix and I were brainstorming about this yesterday too, and I think you've laid a lot of the great groundwork for this already with sort of the suite that you have in Needle in terms of running through the glTF test assets and rendering all of them and doing that with USDZ and having this nice sort of grid of images. Right, I think that, and this same approach is sort of similar to what I think we want to do with the USD GLTF round tripping exercise as well. Same thing where it's like we want to produce a grid, have a curated set of content that is representative of all the features that people that should be supported or that can be advertised as supported, right? And then so you don't have in that way, vendors don't have to claim that they support something. They have to prove it, right? Because that grid will be available for everybody to see, and you can see, okay, this looks and basically have a green check or a red X as to what's supported or not, right?
Like how it looks is one part of the equation there, but I mean, Autodesk and NVIDIA could spear ahead there and actually document we're building against this version of USD with this version's enabled, and these 20% of the schemas won't work because we don't want to implement them. So that goes beyond what you visually see. That is just documentation on what have you done to support USD and glTF in your ecosystem, and what does that mean on a practical level. And I think at this point in time, everyone in the industry is guilty of simply not documenting, either on purpose because of, hey, maybe we change this tomorrow again or whatever. But I would really love to see the standards forums pressuring a bit on documenting this stuff and saying, you should all really say what you support, because it makes it possible for creators to actually use these features.
Right. So kind of leadership by example, maybe. Henrik, do you?
Yeah, but just having that visibility to kind of highlight, I think that's a good way to encourage vendors to either improve their support or document what is supported and not supported in a better way. Because if you can compare all the tools and you see, okay, this tool supports more features than that one, that encourage vendors to kind of at least get to the baseline, those getting that 20% of USD up to 30, 40, so we can get more widespread baseline support across all the tools. But I'm sure we are taking that feedback back and see what we can do to improve the situation documentation wise. But yeah, I think make it visible where the gaps are. That's a good way to encourage vendors to improve their support.
Yeah, and glTF has a big bump of new functionality coming. I mean, Ashley, have you looked at that? Is that kind of scary? Do you think the engines will get their act together?
I mean, I'm excited about it because we get requests all the time for physics and audio and these things. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it primarily from the web perspective first. Luckily, that's where majority of our clients are focused right now. But yeah, I think the game engines is always kind of a crapshoot when something new comes out, and then we kind of wait and see and guess and test, and yeah, so it'd be great, but we can't force everybody to do everything. So
yeah, I like the idea of asking people to voluntarily prove that they have stuff. I think it sets up a positive and healthy gravitational pull in the industry. If people can see that other folks have already implemented stuff, it sets up a forward momentum. So I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up with something like that. We probably have time for one more question. Do we have another question from the audience? Okay, so then, I mean, we are at AWE, so if today, I'm going to keep it grounded for today. If I'm if I'm a XR developer, people here, when should I be using glTF? When should I be using USD? How would you do things? Ashley, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, if you're working, I'd say, with a product company who's primarily trying to publish content across web and other end use cases for someone just to interact and view, I'd say glTF. If you're creating complex scenes that need editing by multiple people, that's more, USD route. So.
Yeah, I probably don't have too much to add to that, but yeah, depending on the magnitude and which platforms you need to target, whether it's, the Apple side of things, then the end format will be USDC, maybe you start with USD. But if you're targeting just kind of the glTF targets, and it's a smaller project, you can start with glTF from the get-go.
Yeah. You said the magic word, USDZ. I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that is a question that often comes up.
Yeah. I'll answer the first question
sure.
first. Certainly, all creators should work in the DCCs that they like best, right? And I think use USD to sort of move data in between those as you're iterating and creating your source content. From there, you have a choice of distilling to USDZ or glTF, right? And maybe even other things as well. And it might depend on whether you're going to be rendering that content on the device locally or in the cloud and streaming it in. There's lots of options there. As for USDZ, right, and glTF, right, again, I think the goal there is to converge on common data models, right, and avoid fracturing the content ecosystem there, even if they need to coexist, right. I think interop, I was strawmanning this with you all before, but I think there's 3 C's, right? There's collaboration, there's competition, there's coexistence, right? And I think the interop journey kind of circles around those 3 things over time and evolution, and all 3 of those things make it better, even the competition, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Agreed. All right. So a few seconds left. So it's been an interesting conversation. Hopefully it's been useful for folks here. One takeaway? What have you learned in the last hour? Difficult question, but you're up for it, I know it. Ashley?
Felix wants to force all the companies to do everything. I do. Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes. No, but documentation is important. I think, look, we've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go, And it's going to take all of us working together and dedicating resources, which very thankful large companies like NVIDIA and Autodesk have done that. Startups like us, we try and participate when we can. But it's going to take everyone here working together to make it happen.
Yeah, Henrik?
Yeah, I mean, the main takeaway from the panel is, I think the documentation and just getting more visibility on what works, and just simplifying the content creation kind of workflow and knowing what works and what is consistently supported. So how can we make that easier? It seems like we need more work on the standard forums part to kind of address that issue, because I don't think any vendor can do that in isolation. So seems to me that that's an area we need to spend more effort.
Yeah,
I think so. I think my takeaway is I'd like to have more physical working sessions on some of these harder problems. Even documenting can be difficult when we're moving so fast that this breaking it down by features might not be, especially if we're doing with the Omniverse. I feel like we have a little bit more of a long-term support type approach to USD, where we're gonna iterate, upgrade more going forward, but to maintain the kind of API stability that we wanted to maintain, right? We've kind of stayed on more mature versions of USD and then cherry-picked features that maintain API and ABI compatibility for things like that, right? But so then it becomes difficult to document exactly all the things we've done. But I think it's worth, kind of a collective working session around these kind of things that are important to the many members of the community that might not be important to exactly the people who are just using the features that we've already cherry picked or things like that.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
And my takeaway kind of on that theme is it's reaffirmed once again that cooperation is good, and we're going to all get through this together if we work collectively and we keep communicating. So please join in your favorite standards organization. Your participation is valuable. If you're a developer, you hold a lot of sway in those developer organizations. And if joining multiple standards organizations is too much, join the forum, and you get multiple standards organizations around the table in one shot. So thank you for your time today. Hopefully that was useful. Thank you to all the speakers.